Oh,
Okay.
Tara and I are here again and continuing our discussion in relation to the mental obsession discussion that we have on Sundays and upload at least every week, except the last one every month, typically. And we left off talking briefly about the second step. This is the third step. Third step is about surrender. It's about alignment. And really, in my vocabulary, it's about making a choice to begin to channel and or align with reality and sanity rather than, and that choice is a prayer. Third step is a prayer, effectively. Made a decision. Our choices, in my estimation, are prayers. We always want something for the choices we make. And in this case, what we're asking for is exactly what we're asked to do in the second half of the 11th step, which is to sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, not improve our contact, but our conscious contact, the way we think about God, asking only for God's will, meaning that's all there is, and the power to carry that out, meaning I have no power. I've already discovered that in the first step and coming to terms with the second step. And the first step, I'm insane thinking that I have power, because every time I continue to make believe that I can control and enjoy something I can't control and enjoy, I launch into a series of behaviors that give me evidence that something's wrong, and I continue to think it's the only thing I can do, and it's the only right thing I can do. So that is not healthy, sane behavior. It's actually insane behavior, which is why we have the capacity to be restored to sanity in the second step. So in the third step, we're just making a decision. And what I learned by listening to some of the old timers about this is early on, they didn't make a decision every day, every day, every day, every day. They made it once on their knees with someone else, simply saying a prayer, not necessarily the third step prayer, any prayer that would basically acknowledge they had a problem and that if there was a God, if God could help them, they would appreciate it. Very simple. And you do it with somebody on your knees. That's how they originally did it before the steps were designed, and it is how many continued to do it well after the steps were designed, based on the original Oxford group steps. So the first 100 people that got sober on the Oxford group steps, the 6 steps. Basic outline was the same. The steps were not quite as well defined as Bill eventually defined them. So that's my little third step mention. So we're here to discuss the mental obsession as the primary issue that is the disease of addiction, centered in the mind because it's where it happens, it's where it's caused. And it isn't about thinking being wrong, it's about wrong thinking being thought of as right that sets the obsession off. It's the conflict in our own thinking that does that. If there is an absolute, unlimited, infinite, all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipotent is the word Bill uses, not all-knowing, but omnipotent, which is effectively all-knowing. If that power exists, then it isn't that power that is lacking. It isn't that power that is lost. It isn't that power that comes and goes. It's how I think about it that determines the feelings I have and the thoughts I have about it, as though it changes when my thoughts change. And to think in those terms is to miss the responsibility for what I'm doing and think everyone and everything else is somehow to blame for my condition, rather than the preemptive strike I've determined to be correct in terms of my thinking not being the cause of those variations that I reckon with and those ups and downs of feelings that I feel.
I think where I get snagged on that is you say that it's not wrong thinking. And I'm having a hard time finding that to be true. My thinking when I was that I could not stop drinking. I didn't want to at the end, but I believed I had no choice.
Right.
And that is wrong thinking.
Yes, the problem with it isn't the wrong thinking, though. It's thinking that wrong thinking is right, where the conflict gets set off.
Let's break that down. So my thinking was, I don't want to drink. I don't know what else to do, so I'm going to drink. I know this is wrong. I know I've seen people in the rooms do something different.
Right.
I've been in the rooms for years at this point, but I didn't know how to not drink. I didn't know how to not do it.
But you were also admitting in that sentence that you didn't want to anymore and still seemed to think you couldn't stop, right?
Exactly. I was thinking wrong.
So you had a clear awareness of something
Yes.
that you shouldn't be doing and then felt compelled to constantly do it.
Correct.
So insanity, which is really what the heart of this addiction is insanity, because in the first step, we're insane. We think there's no other choice, but why would we say there's no other choice if it were actually choice we were thinking about? Because the principle of choice always allows not to be chosen. And principles aren't a negotiable, optional state or condition. They're just how they are. Principles are principles. Now, if I've hijacked my own experience by making believe my thinking is correct, and that my reliance is solely on my thinking, I am now in this vicious cycle that goes around and around and around and comes up with all kinds of irrational commentary to justify continuing to do exactly what I even know. You even admitted that you know it's wrong and you keep doing it as though you have no control. So the awareness of that knowing is correct, and the thinking about that knowing is incorrect. Now, it's not the wrong that's wrong. I can think right now, I want to have a drink. But within the context of sanity, I can see exactly where that thought will take me if I pursue it. I don't think that I'm going to have that drink without consequence. I know if I have that drink, I am going to face absolute certain calamity of some sort. But if I think that thinking is true, now I take that wrong thought and think, you know what? It's right. Circumstances warranted. I've had enough. I'm sick and tired. I can't seem to undo it. I'm constantly stuck. I don't know what to do with this condition that I constantly face every day, feeling depressed, feeling demoralized, feeling incomprehensibly unable to keep up with everything that's going on. And pretty soon that rationalization starts to make that look pretty good, because within the insane idea, drinking is the solution. Drugs are the solution. An altered state is the solution, while I'm not even admitting I'm altering the state of my own experience by thinking those things, because there's chemicals in my body being released as though this is an absolute emergency. And now I'm driven as though I'm running from something, but I'm actually running into the arms of that thing I'm running from. It's all backward.
Which I think, and I followed all of that. What I hear you saying is that it is the wrong thinking. During that monologue or whatever that was that you got us up to the point where you took the drink, you talked yourself into taking a drink,
Right.
Which goes back to my point that it is wrong thinking. The
Okay.
mental obsession is wrong thinking, and the solution is to get in touch with true reality by changing our thinking. Here's something I do at night when I think I've already said this, but well, let's just focus on this one.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Yeah. So you are right. But the real cataclysmic event of blindness begins when we think that wrong thought is right. It isn't just a wrong thought, because I have wrong thoughts all day. And I can either act on them and begin to reinforce them by thinking they're right, or I can begin to notice the calamity that begins when I start thinking they're right. And I know immediately something's disturbing me. Something feels out of order. Something doesn't feel right. Right? So it's really the decision. The ultimate issue here, which you just also tapped on, is you want to stop the wrong so that you can start revealing truth, as though truth is actually blocked by your thinking. Think of how flimsy truth would be. This is the whole point of thinking God changes when our thinking changes.
we 100% block truth with our false thinking. That's what denial is. That's right.
Then thinking is in fact more powerful than God, and there is no infinite source.
I don't know that it's black or white like that. I think that implies that it's black or white. I think that it is the whole notion of being insane is the blocking of what is true. And
Right.
so you can be in a state of insanity, and in that state of insanity, you are creating this kind of like in our dreams, where we can power our dreams and change the way things happen in our dreams. In our life,
reality.
Right. And so then it's not. And so in my life, I can lay in bed at night. I'll go to my example, which I may have already shared on here, but it is so true. When I lay there and I'm thinking, I can't sleep. I drank too much coffee. I drank coffee too late. It was 12:30. I should have stopped at 11. I can't sleep. I'm so wiggly. I'm going to only get 6 hours of sleep. And I'm keeping myself awake literally with my thoughts. Now, in this scenario, I can change my thoughts because I have the power to change my thoughts. And I can say, I'm so tired. My bed is so comfortable. I'm so sleepy. I can take deep breaths. I can use this voice, and I'm going to get such a good night's sleep. And I literally use the power of my thoughts. I'm not changing what is true. I'm not changing the essence of God or truth, but I am changing my experience to benefit my experience. I'm changing my thoughts to change my experience.
Yes.
Does that change the static truth of gravity? No. Does it change the way I'm experiencing it? Abso-fucking-lutely.
Okay. So
that's where I go back to the power of thought.
There you go, though. The power, the seeming power, is the delusion that we're creating reality. And that's the insanity. Insanity can't be real, or it wouldn't be insane. This is the whole...
I don't know. Is it a delusion, or am I able to then fall asleep and I literally use my thoughts to change my experience?
I'm not suggesting that the thoughts, what you're doing is beginning to pry yourself away from the insane thoughts that you can't go to sleep when you're perfectly capable of going to sleep.
Got it.
You're starting to actually align with what's happening rather than the hysteria that the body starts to develop with the adrenaline and all that stuff. And it's easy to follow that chemical reaction. But when you start noticing it, you say, oh, what I started saying is exactly what my mother used to say when she looked in my eyes, and she'd say, you're up to something. And what I realized is that I'm up to something, and I'm not even noticing that I'm doing something that's causing an effect that I'm claiming to be irresponsible for because I'm not willing to notice. It couldn't be happening if I wasn't doing something. It's happening, so I must be doing something. I start to connect the dot of what seems invisible and recognize that the invisibility of it is, the effect is revealing to me that there's something going on that I don't think I see or understand. And that's really the subconscious, this lower motivation that Bill talked about, the conditions and causes that are seemingly underneath all that stuff, that strange mental blank spot he referred to. But how does this happen? Because I'm denying that I'm actually aware while I'm absolutely aware of the effects, and I'm refusing to admit the effects are the cause by claiming the effects are the cause. The effects are revealing the cause, and the cause is in thinking, and the effect is I can't sleep. So what am I going to do? Not sleep. I'm going to prove the wrong is right. That's the whole twist of addiction, is this idea that if I do more, I drank to excess to prove I had control over alcohol. Doesn't make any sense to do that. To drink with complete abandon, to complete oblivion, to say, look at me, I can still stand up, I can still drive and do all these things that clearly could have led to much more catastrophic consequences than they did. And by using the fact that the worst hadn't happened, that I was still in control, is just another bit of insanity, as though the worst couldn't possibly happen because it hadn't happened. And I've known many people to spend years in prison for running people over while they were drunk. It happens.
Yeah, it happens.
So you're really describing it, but the clarity is starting to see that the absolute nature doesn't change. Our experience of it changes. And noticing that and beginning to actually say, oh, I'm the one that's been causing the opinion that God isn't listening. I'm the one causing the opinion that I'm not getting what I want. I'm the one inducing all of those impositions, and those impositions become very depressing after I chronically, by the way, with brand new thoughts. These aren't old thoughts. These are brand new thoughts about old things not happening, that I'm constantly reinforcing it. I'm back into that loop of thought. So now this may seem subtle until you begin to realize the drama that's been created in human history, currently now, and in our own experiences. The dramatization of all this stuff is traumatic, and it's caustic and reactive in the relationships we have. We have severe limits with the people who are closest to us because they're so close, we can use that magnification of their closeness to blame them as being the bigger problem and all that kind of stuff. It's very easy to become induced into that state of thinking. And this is while you're stone cold sober. This clarity of the problem becomes more obvious when you're not altering your chemical balance with exterior chemicals, and start noticing that you're already playing with chemicals in your own body that are using up the chemicals that would normally be there when you need them, and they're not, and would be there when for well-being, while they're either overused or underproduced as a result of the stress we're creating. So
I do think we're saying the same thing.
We are, except the one aspect of this is that if reality is reality and it's infinite, it isn't like the things we experience in this world where the opposite of love is hate and the opposite of up is down and the opposite of something is something else. It's all the same. The opposite of an infinite source is infinite, because there are no parts and pieces in that realm. And to begin to notice that is to begin to notice what infinite means in its ultimate sense, not in the more convenient physics sense where they're sort of defining it as something that, for instance, people think everlasting is infinite. Well, in fact, if it's everlasting and ever expanding, it means right now it's limited. So it couldn't possibly be infinite unless everything beyond those limits is also seen as the same thing. Sort of like the horizon. When they looked at the horizon and thought it was doomed, they thought nothing was beyond it. Well, in fact, the whole time, you can't look at a ball and see both halves ever. You can hold a basketball and nobody seems to say, I can't see the other half, I can't play the game. Half the ball's missing. And yet we do that on the planet. We do that in these bigger ways to make believe that somehow if we can't see it, it isn't there. And as a result, we have nothing to do with it. When in fact, it's exactly what the sailors did when they thought because they couldn't see over the horizon, there was nothing beyond it, while everything was beyond that. So the third step is really making a decision, and a decision is a thought, to turn our will, to start looking beyond thinking and the ends of thinking, and start to see that there is something there. And as a matter of fact, everything begins with the limits of my thoughts, at the end of my thoughts, rather than anything ends by defending my thoughts. The defensive nature of the obsession is my thoughts aren't wrong. There's where the conflict is. When insane, the only thing that if you go into an insane asylum and say, I'm insane, I need help, they'd say, well, you can't be insane and admit it. If you came in here and were complete lunatic and said you were perfectly sane, we'd admit you immediately. But if the problem with insanity is thinking it's sane, the problem with our truth is thinking it's truth. The problem with my reality is thinking it is reality. Those things we can think, we're free to think those things, but they aren't true in the true sense, in the absolute sense. And that's where the division and this conflict and all of these bits and pieces of this fractured seeming state of mind start to develop into all of these disorders, because we have the order out of order. We put thinking first. Thinking is the problem. It isn't the problem. It's a misuse of it. It's the idea that thinking of itself turns us into our thoughts. That means we're the creators of the universe. We're the creators of humanity. We're the creators of our own experience. And we have nothing to do with reality. Reality has nothing to do with us because we've made our own. That's a major flaw. Feeling disconnected and alone is a common consequence of that thinking. Not because we're alone, but because we're feeling the thoughts we're having that are so lonely as to have no substance, have no basis in reality whatsoever. They're delusional. It's what delusion is. It's the idea that an illusion is reality. An image is true. A story is, in fact, life. No, they're just stories. They're narratives. They're fictions. So it may seem subtle, and yes, we're both on the exact same point, and your verbiage doesn't need to match mine to see this. But to begin to notice that the knowing is the knowing and the awareness is the awareness, and we always have it, we always are it in our essence, is to see how much calamity and damage we've caused to even believe that the thinking has any power whatsoever over it. Because when you begin to realize the enormity of something infinite, you begin to see clearly that thinking is a very small thing we're doing that seems to be wreaking a lot of havoc. It's something we do. It's just something. It's like I can wave my arm. I don't become a bird, and I don't spend all day wondering why one arm doesn't get me to fly because I can't get the other one to do the same thing.
Well, I think that's because there's a reaction to our thinking. You had mentioned earlier there's a chemical reaction to our thinking.
Yes.
There is, our behavior is different depending on our thinking.
Yes.
So it's not just the thinking, it is the symptoms of thinking that is extremely problematic. And so I come at this with, okay, so if the core of the problem is the thinking that causes all of these subsequent problems, let's solve the problem, which is wrong thinking, or I like your term, misuse of thoughts. Maybe it's not wrong thinking. Maybe it's just misusing our thoughts, because like Emmett Fox says, we cannot say, this is literally his example, don't think of the Statue of Liberty. And all you're going to think about is statue. You have to replace a thought with a thought. And so perhaps, like your example last week, I think it was, with your keys. When you misplace your keys, it's not, I lost my keys, I don't know where they are. You replace that thought, that misuse of thought, with, I know where they are. I put them there. Wherever they are, I know exactly where they are. So this notion of how do we solve the problem, and I'm a problem solver by nature, is let's scooch back to the misuse of thoughts and solve for that with some actual techniques. And that's where all these self-help books come in. And they just come at it in 100 different angles. And I think fundamentally what you're saying, Jack, is there's only one fucking angle, and that's God is infinite, God is perfect, God is love. You replace all wrong thoughts with that thought.
Well, it just begins to distinguish the difference, and there isn't an angle to it because it's not a spatially, we've relied on this sort of construction of thought as being reality so long, we've developed a whole language around it that isn't accurate. So there is no angle in God because there is no dimension in a non-time bound state, space bound reality. Real reality isn't bound by time and space. This is even humans have designed the dimensions as this is one dimension of many that they're looking at, and they become infinite very quickly beyond this one that we seem to be in. So this performance that's going on of forms is an expression of possibility of reality. It isn't reality in its total, and yet the total of reality is also it. So I want to mention that with the mistaken thinking are misgivings. We mistake, so we misgive. And we feel the doubt, we feel the uncertainty, we know it. That chemical reaction that you talked about is set off in our body because we know better. And this is very fundamental to the discussion. If there's a knowing nature that's absolute, we couldn't possibly not know that nature and be a part of nature. So the knowing you're talking about is not a knowing in thought. It's a knowing that precedes thought and gives you the impression that something's wrong, which is why we're always so clear about what's wrong. We have a sense something is seriously wrong. We wouldn't have that wrong if we didn't have this greater knowing sense that is absolutely part of what is absolutely not a part of anything, but the whole of everything. And to begin doing that is really see what meditation is about and contemplation is about. Just beginning to notice if this is the natural state, it doesn't come and go, and it isn't sometime and not other times. It isn't when we impose thoughts on our thinking and think they're real where we have that disconnected feeling. The disconnected feeling we're having is based on the body's manifestation of an effect based on the thinking we're doing. It isn't based on God. It isn't based on reality. It's based on what we're thinking about reality and what we're thinking about God and what we're thinking about ourselves. So when you're thinking you can't sleep and you keep thinking you can't sleep, what do? Not sleep. You want to confirm the wrongness of the thought is right by doing the thing you claim you can't do. That's the addiction. It's very subtle. And yet the profound nature of it, having gone on as long as it has caused horrific problems that seem to be so, we call them human nature, war and all this stuff. It is not natural. It's a condition that has come as a result of this line of thinking for as long as written history has been written. This kind of thinking has been subjecting people to the rigors of other people's potential seeming power, which is just violence, to condemn them for not thinking the way they think. It all comes down to a thought.
You know, since we've been engaging in this conversation, not just today, but the last few, I guess, couple months, maybe weeks, I perceive humanity and just humans in my everyday engagement with them as so much more broken than I previously realized.
Yes.
Just everyone seems so broken in their, on the road driving, on their reaction in the store, well, pause. You have a guest. Is this the wife?
Getting papaya.
Yes. Did she bring you mango? Hi.
Oh,
Thank you.
Oh,
you. Very nice to meet you.
nice to meet you.
Katie's my backstop.
Is that fresh mango? That looks like fresh mango.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, the wife just delivered fresh sliced mango, which is not easy to slice.
No, well, to your point earlier, real quick, while you're on this, to begin to see the absolute nature clearly is to begin to see what's wrong clearly. And I will guarantee you, when you start looking, it's going to be very disturbing, because we have been denying we have anything to do with it and thinking of it as something out there somewhere else rather than exactly where we are. And the real core of that is starting to see how limited our thinking has been about our participation and our culpability and our responsibility for everything that is happening. We may only have choice over our own thinking, but collectively, what we all do is what impacts us. That's the greatest impact, because there's 8 billion people making decisions about things. And if a lot of them are sick in their decision making, how could we possibly avoid the impact of those things? And that reactiveness you're talking about, there is reactiveness and there is responsiveness. Responsibility is the ability to respond, meaning a considered, contemplative observation before acting out. Mentally obsessive thinking is an immediate reaction because it's desperately trying to defend against the lie that it's maintaining in the name of thinking it's right. So all it is defensive. All it is filled with fear. What's the fear? I'm going to be found out. Why am I going to be found out if I'm not in something I think I am, which is making believe all I am is what I think? I feel I'm stuck in that. That's the insanity you were describing in step one. I really believed, I knew better the whole time. I had the exact same experience you did. I knew something was wrong from the time I was 15, 16 years old, because I watched what I was doing and did not see other people doing it that way. And they all seemed to be having much more fun than I was. Even getting high, I would sit, there was a part of my head saying, I don't even know what we're doing here. I don't know why we keep doing this over and over and over again. I'm not getting the things done they're doing to get to college and all that. I'm not functioning well. And I knew it and didn't seem to know how to stop. So breaking.
Which reminds me of that victim mentality.
That's all it is. I'm blaming, shaming, faulting. I think of guilt. We've turned it into a feeling when in fact it's actually an indictment of our own responsibility for what we're doing. We feel guilt because we're guilty. We've convicted ourselves for the guilt for absolutely knowing what we're doing and acting like we don't. We're aware of it all. We just haven't introduced thinking, which is exactly what the third step is doing, because it's introducing us to the second half of the 11th step, asking only for God's will and the power to carry that out. Why? That's all there is a loving source. There isn't all these other optional, negotiable ways of Love doesn't come in forms. And I would suggest that love isn't something humans ever do. It's something humans express naturally as a function of that channeling and that alignment with that absolute power. We start functioning on that basis, so we start expressing it. And it doesn't come because we say, look at me, I'm thinking right. We just start doing things that doesn't take any thinking at all. And we know it's right because we see the difference that's being made that's productive for everyone and useful for everyone. It becomes obvious because it's confirmed immediately as something that works, just like 2 + 2 is 4. Once you get it, you never have to go back to the rudiments of math to be able to put that back to, you just know it is. So you use it. That's attractive to other people because if they watch you, they can do the same thing and be better, feel better, get better. Now we're actually feeling better because even looking at the wrong, as you described, by starting to look at how broken people are, is starting to see the level of anxiety and stress and insanity that we've been dealing with as though it's normal. It isn't. It has never been normal. We've normalized abnormality through history. We've tried. We've failed, but we've tried.
Really depressing.
It is. And you know what? I realized how sad I was very young. I had a sense of things as being wrong. I didn't know what to do about them. And that same abiding sense lives in me. It doesn't mean I'm not happy and joyous and free for the happiness and the joy that I've got from being free enough to look at this stuff accurately. What's happened for me is I began to see that my responsibility has always been committed to doing everything I can for everyone that is and everything that is, rather than simply thinking of myself as some solo act trying to create something with the walls high enough that I never get attacked and subject to any kind of wrong from anybody else and think that that's a whole life to be lived. I don't see it that way. And I never did. I didn't understand why I felt so discordant about things and disrupted by things. But as that began to be clear, I started in the beginning of the Course of Miracles, it says, if you're reading this honestly and seeing this accurately, you should be disturbed. We've been making stuff out of nothing, making believe it's reality, and we've been denying the absolute reality. There's the nature of the possibility and freedom we have to even do that insane thing. Think of what love is giving us that absolute freedom to do whatever we want, and it doesn't make the right that we have to do those things right.
Didn't follow that last part. It doesn't make the
if we have the right
so
to if we have the right to think that our reality is only what we think and there is no other reality, that's a pretty free range to think. But having that right doesn't mean the thinking we're doing is right.
Okay, got it.
And the conclusion of relying on thinking as reality is that everything I think is right, which is why expectations are always dashed, because when I make a decision, I think the only thing that should ever happen is what I originally imagined would happen. And when it doesn't, I think my life is at risk. That's all set up in this idea of my thinking is reality, my thinking is truth. It isn't. It's an expression. It's a potential expression of truth and reality. It's also a potential expression of insanity, irrationality, and a lack of reality. It doesn't mean that reality's lacking. It means that what I'm thinking is lacking any kind of substance. And so think of darkness. If light and life and love are the essence of this absolute knowingness, when I have a thought with no substance, there's no light in it. So I feel dark, gloomy, doomed, afraid. I've cast shadows of doubt. Knowing better, I wouldn't have doubt if I didn't. And to start seeing the body language is really begin to turn the opportunity we have into a functional literacy, meaning we're literally reading the domestic language of our body, rather than treating it as some foreign thing that we don't want anything to do with. I got to get away from it. I want to feel better. I want to do things to constantly feel better about what I'm doing that's worse, rather than start to really address the worst aspect and say, you know what? If this has been centered in my thinking, I have been doing a lot of thinking about things I don't even think I'm thinking about. And it might be worth noting that. And that becomes pausing, restrain of pen and tongue, and a prayer. A little prayer of thought of, wow, if I'm doing these things and I don't want to be doing those things, and I continue doing those things, it may be my own reliance on my thinking about my thinking that's causing those things to continue. And this would give me clear evidence of a limit I have in terms of any faith or any reliance on an absolute state of being.
So I
Only
follow
within
all that
thinking.
because what's that?
It's only within thinking, though. I always know what I know, and I am aware of what I'm aware. I wouldn't have the clarity to know what's wrong if I didn't have that knowing awareness. So our discussion's really about, you said it the other day in your premonition with the Red Cross when you were going to get your blood done. You were thinking of that situation as one that you would have assigned to having given blood because of the feelings you had, and then you didn't give blood, but you had those same feelings, and realized that you would have naturally connected the two as though they were absolutely connected, rather than see they may have some independence and freedom when the experience you're having. But you also had a premonition of not to go the same day a car hit the building. That's sometimes we're so inept at noticing that the clarity we have is so clear, and we try to make sense out of it experientially because we've been addictively looking at circumstances and the people, places, and things as all the justifications, rather than our own experience being perfectly clear. We think we need an excuse to justify something we know that we know. And this intuition, as Bill described it, is defined as knowledge beyond reason. It means there's no reason, there's no logic, there's no thought in it at all. It is a knowing of knowing. And when we know, we know, and we know, and somebody says, how do you know? You say, I don't know, I just know. So we admit not knowing, and while we admit knowing, in that same breath, we know. And in this process of just beginning to concede that, for me, had me sit still for about a month. I mean, I felt like I couldn't even walk. It was not paralyzing, but I realized how much impulsive activity I'd kept moving, thinking I was going to get to that place that I'd always been. And when I started realizing that, I started undoing a lot of things that I had repetitively redo, thinking they were the solution and I needed to maintain them. And it was up to my thinking to realize God rather than say, wait a minute, I am a product of that power. Whatever that power is, I don't even have to define it for it to be as it is right now. Nor do I have to expect it is for anyone else, but I can start to see that it would be impossible that it isn't for everyone else and everything else, not just people, but animals and all of it, the whole structure that we're witnessing, the whole universe.
So I have a couple thoughts. When we are in that, well, when we're in this, we've been doing this thing,
Right.
wrong thinking or misusing our thinking for so long, and we've created chaos around us. For alcoholics, it's very easy to see the chaos that is caused from our drinking or our using, and that darkness that you talked about. So we're in that dark place, and we're misusing our thinking about that dark place.
It's causing it.
That's causing it.
Yeah.
To get to the other side of it is painful, exhausting. It's not like a switch that we can just flip and say, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to start thinking differently.
It is, but we have
You
so
think
much,
so?
we have so much thinking imbued in this idea that it's up to thinking to get us to that place. We loop right back into thinking, I got to think more about it, rather than say, if it's delusional, it's the thought right now that it's real that's causing it to continue. What I generally suggest, most of the men that I work with, and most of them are guys because the women tend to work with women in sobriety, but I've had plenty of women to discuss this. If I just start admitting my thoughts aren't reality, they're just images I'm creating based on a lot of information, sensory information that is constantly, 24 hours a day being fed into my system. My brain is designed to do what it can to analyze it and come up with good decisions that are survival oriented. If the survival is just trying to get beyond these things, I'm constantly creating the drag that I'm getting. It's like a sailor with the anchor down, and he keeps wondering why the boat's so slow. He can't see the anchor under the water, but he can see the rope. So those manifestations, my experience is that thoughts manifest effects. Thoughts are the cause of effects. If the effects we're feeling are disturbing, I know immediately now I'm thinking a disturbing thought. So if I line up the cause and effect as being These are flip sides of the same coin, but they're never divided. So they're immediate. The effect is immediate to cause, but it's always preceded by cause. While it's immediate, it's also preceded. Effects don't just happen on their own without a cause, but cause are always creating effects. And if that's the manifestation I've been taking as reality, I've been mistaking my thinking as being reality for so long that I keep looping. As soon as I see it, I loop back and think I need to think more about it again. Rather than begin to see, if I'm thinking a delusional thought right now, what is there to stop? It's about not restarting it. If I'm constantly trying to treat the effect, I'm constantly trying to avoid the cause rather than saying, oh, if it's delusional, and I just start laughing because it's so ridiculous to think that there was ever anything to stop, except the thought I had that I needed to stop it as though it had some existence of its own that I needed to stop, like it was a train or a car, or something being motivated in my direction that I didn't want. It was my own thinking about it that was continuing to create that. So I created the whole loop. I became the master of the thought, of reality, and the slave to it at the same time.
Well, isn't that what you do when you lose your keys and you change your words in your mind from I lost my keys, I don't know where they are, to I know where my keys are, I just don't remember?
The difference is I always knew where they were, even when I thought I didn't. And when I began to acknowledge that my greater no, part of that came to me because I started to look at what are the practical applications of this. And it would be thinking things during the day are true. Well, I can't do that. And well, they're going to do that. And all this kind of presumptive thinking I do. And I started realizing that was all based on faulty thinking. All of it. All of the ideas I have that are so clear about what's wrong in the world. If I have any wrong in my own experience, I'm not admitting the clarity I'm having about it is avoiding the clarity I have about creating it. So the knowingness was always there, just like the absolute source was always there. I'm just finally aligning my thinking with what I always knew, rather than perpetuating this idea that thinking is going to overcome. I've been addicted so long to my thinking, I always think it's going to be thinking that's going to solve it, save the day. When in fact, if the thinking is based on a premise that I forgot and can't find, what am I going to do? I'm going to forget that I can't find. And I'm going to pretend I have nothing to do with it and constantly can't find what I'm looking for. Humans have been seeking answers as long as humans have existed, and apparently nobody's asked. We must be looking for something that we already have. The hardest place to find is the one you're in if you make believe you're not there. And that's what we've been doing. Deep breath.
Yeah, it reminds me of what my mother used to say all the time. It is in the most obvious place.
Yes.
And it's so obvious, you don't even think to look there.
And you know why it's obvious? Because it hasn't been forgotten, and the keys don't have a mind of their own, and they're not saying, where am I going to hide? Where's the least likely place for them to look? It's very interesting that we would cause that whole dilemma and drama in our own thinking and not even notice how clever and creative we are, and give ourselves some credit due for this extraordinary capacity we have to completely mislead our whole experience and act like we have nothing to do with it. We built the maze and said, I don't know how to get out. That's why they used to kill the slaves that built the pyramids, because they knew where everything was located, all the treasures. They knew if they swore them to secrecy, they'd be back to take it. So they just killed them. We kill ourselves in that same way, thinking that stress and anxiety is normal and depression is just normal. It's just some genetic predisposition that I have, and it may be to a degree. But if I can make it worse, I can get better. Period. And we've been making it worse for centuries. To have the number of anxiety disorders we have today grows. The diagnoses keep growing. And what do? We treat the symptoms. Help people.
So what's the solution?
To notice that we have an absolute state of being, each of us and all of us simultaneously, that there's never been anything divisible between us. It's only been a division of thought that gave us that impression, that we've created gods that seem to hate people because they don't think like we do. That is not God. That is an egoistic idea about God. Humans have been relying on that to justify their own failed responsibility in doing what they're doing that's violent and inexcusable. So what do? blame it on God. God makes me do this. It's interesting. Beginning to see that an absolute source is absolute. It doesn't change. It's the simplest thing you could possibly ever imagine. So simple that it reveals all the complications in our thinking immediately, just like you just admitted, starting to see how disturbed looking out at the world becomes. You start seeing with clarity because your lens is no longer preoccupied with a fractured state of thinking. The clarity that's slowly occurring to you is the clarity you've always had. You're just giving credit for the clarity and saying, wow, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of people in need. There's a lot of people that could use a conversation that might be more valuable than the one they're repeating in their head and is being repeated socially as, well, we can't do anything about it. What the hell? Let's just go get a drink. Let's go have fun. Let's go on vacation. Let's go do something that distracts us from it. If we're being distracted all the time, we're admitting we know.
But it's reprieve, right? So you have you have people that don't even know that they're stuck on step one. Well, they know something's not right, but they point to, I'm unhappy in my marriage. I'm unhappy about my job. I'm unhappy. They don't have, it's almost like when somebody yells at you about something and you know it has nothing to do with you. You're like, you're mad about something else, and I'm just your closest target. So these people, so many people, and including myself, are restless, irritable, and disconnected. I have the steps, I have the program, I have all of these tools that the 12 steps and the rooms have given me, and I use them every single day. If I want to be serene, I have to use them every single day. But the rest of humanity that doesn't have an addiction, like alcohol, maybe an addiction to thoughts, or addiction to I don't know, sugar, or insert whatever reprieve they're taking to get a break from this crushing weight of life on them due to their misuse of thoughts and lack of connection to source. They are using vacation, they're using whatever to get a break from what feels so hard. How do we help those people, or how do they get to this conversation?
Well, if you and I are successful at discussing this openly and honestly, and starting to see that if we know, they too know, and we always knew, it wasn't something lost on us. What was lost was the thinking we kept perpetuating, and gave us the impression that life was lost and all those things were lost, and start to see that those things they're doing are just compulsions. They're exactly what drinking was, a distraction from something. And what I realized in my thinking is that as long as I am denying what's happening, I am perpetuating what's happening. I become the central player in the cause that I'm thinking everyone else needs to realize, when in fact I'm denying in my own experience the exact same thing. Even if it's not as obvious as it used to be, if it's as subtle as thinking everyone else is doing something and they don't know better, I am perpetuating that mythology that they don't know better. They're just victims. They're what I used to be until I got smarter. And I'm just not as big a dumbass anymore. So I think they're living now in the same insanity that I thought I was in, and I'm now admitting it for them and reinforcing the insanity as though they don't have any sanity at all. The root of life is sane. It isn't insanity. Insanity is a choice. In terms of this insanity, I'm not suggesting there aren't people that are born with major defects. And after history, after our DNA has historically tried to make sense of insanity, I would say it's natural that the physiology would eventually adapt in ways that are maladaptive, that bodily functions, like the allergies we have today. That stuff they didn't have allergies to wheat and all that stuff 1,000 years ago. It was critical to their survival. Today, we've got allergies to all sorts of things, and they keep dividing and getting more and more and more and more because the basis of our thinking, we're allergic to lies. We're allergic to the idea that reality isn't reality unless we make it. And if we don't make it, we need to make it more and use thinking. We're allergic to that. It's repulsive to our nature. It undermines our capacity to function as humans. It is not our high point. And yet it's perfectly free that we do that. We're all free to do that. So to see the freedom they have is to really begin to acknowledge the freedom we thought we had, while not acknowledging the condemnation that came as a consequence to that freedom. If what I do freely is choose thoughts and then feel condemned, I'm choosing thoughts that are contemptful because I'm making believe they're the right thing when in fact they're not. Because that intuitive knowing doesn't have any doubt in it. It doesn't second guess. It isn't a second opinion. It's a knowing of knowing. So my dysfunctional nature and the language we've developed around excusing this, the whole self-help movement. Imagine if self is only what we think about our thinking itself, and we have mistaken that for being center to a self that's in the middle of thinking all the time. That isn't a self. That's just a mistaken identity that we have been trying to fight and correct and fix. And we need a break from it because it's broken. We are reinforcing the brokenness to think we're getting a break from it rather than realize in mental conditions, when we go on vacation, guess what comes with us? Mm-hmm. I can get away from a bank I robbed and maybe get away with the crime. When it comes to thinking, I don't get away with anything. And when I admit that I get away with it, I start to admit the term actually is applying. It goes everywhere I go. I get away with it, not from it. All of the standard operating procedures don't work because now we're looking centrally at what our choices are and how our choices affect our opinions and the effects that are manifest in our bodily sensations. The immediacy of this is so clear that as you start noticing it, you'll start laughing at the old ideas you want to use and realize, just like drinking, they have no place. They've never worked. It's silly to even imagine right now you're going to continue. So the immediacy of the moment becomes exactly what we talk about in sobriety, about the maintenance of the spiritual condition, the daily reprieve. What is the reprieve? Everywhere I am, I realize my thinking is at the center of my internal conflict, my emotional turmoil, and my mental anguish, always. If something is happening outside of me, it's what I'm thinking about it that causes those problems. If I wasn't thinking about it, the problems I think I have wouldn't exist. It's not to say that there aren't sadnesses in life. It's to say that when there are, having sadness is a very natural thing to express. To long for somebody, to miss somebody, but to miss people in their essence continuously, day by day by day, to me, one of the greatest traumatic experiences we can have, because we're constantly grieving, we're constantly mourning in some sense. We're constantly hoping for some better day while we're constantly maintaining the darkness of the present time. And it isn't really dark. It's just dark within the thinking we're doing about the thinking. It's a dream, and most nightmares, if you've ever had one, which I imagine you have, do not seem so bad once you wake up and realize, oh, it was a dream. It's the same thing with this thinking. When I started admitting, oh, it's just a thought I'm having that's wrong. That's all. And I started laughing. And the delusion is gone because it's never been there except to my constant repetitive maintenance of now. So once I start seeing what I'm doing, then I leap to everybody else. Now I see everybody else really clearly, and I know how much wrong there is in the world. And I would say to a degree, that's right. We are aware of it. But if we're not doing on our part what we can do with our thinking, we're not doing anyone out there any service, because we're not becoming a voice that's worth listening to, because we're telling them what they need to do to get to where we are, rather than say, you're already there. Even our own thinking. When my presence is such that I know people are intact, and when I'm confronting them, all I'm confronting is the wobbly thinking that they're doing. If there's any kind of argument, I'm not as prone to get involved in that argument as quickly. And yet I still do. But there's an awareness that, oh, this isn't the best direction to go. All I'm doing, if I'm confronting insanity and thinking I'm going to be reasonable, I now become insane thinking I'm going to become reasonable with insanity. That's insane. So sometimes it's better just to listen, let people get it all out, kind of like the third step in the third column in the fourth step. If you exaggerate all the fears to the worst, and you ask somebody, if you hate me now, why don't you go full bore in that direction? Give me it all. Give me all the thoughts you've had. Give me all the doubts you've had. Give me all the bitterness, all that stuff. When that's out, it's amazing how it just evaporates. And to give people the freedom to do that is to give them the freedom to start to have the perspective that they don't have to do that. It's not a requirement. I'm not good at it, but I like talking about this to get better at the conversation because I noticed that I have a lot of missteps in my own. I spoke at a meeting the other day and the guy said, I hear this from a lot of people. I've heard you before. Something sounds right, but I don't always understand it. So I normally say, well, the rightness is actually your awareness. If we're speaking at all about truth as true, there's a knowingness that confirms it because you know, and if word is being attached that's actually applicable to that, then you would have a sense of confirmation in that. It's like 2 + 2 is 4, and you don't spend a lot of time going back through the rudiments to figure it all out. But the understanding is different. And that's what I felt you and I got started, to think about this from a point of view that could be laid out in a way that's as simple as possible. Because if people already know, they don't need to be told as much as I tend to speak. I know that I overspeak and I overshare, but I'm really I'm trying to get out the bounty of information that seems to pass through me. And I don't know I need to do that. I feel compelled. I feel inspired. I love doing it because it feels like the best thing I've ever done. It feels like the thing that I've always been designed to do, because it seems like confronting this would be worthwhile if it's something our species is struggling with, and thus every other species and genus and all the other plants and animals are bearing that weight also. Probably be a useful thing to talk about. And yet there's probably some simpler ways to lay it out where it could be seen within a structure that somebody could contemplate on a simple basis and have that knowing awareness in terms that will be unique to their thinking, because we all have that freedom to come up with whatever the vocabulary is of our experience, and start to allow thinking to actually express it and start to see what thinking is really designed to do, which is to channel, to express, to allow it to flow through us and be an expression of that infinite source, rather than, oh, it's my thinking that did it. It's where the great fullness comes from, the fullness of greatness that becomes obvious when we start confirming it by simply expressing it and talking about it.
Good job. Stayed at a good level of comprehension.
Oh, good. Well, you have helped give me some perspective, because you're very stable in your awareness and you're very willing to speak to it, and you're very open to consider things. And I don't do this because I think I'm always right. I do this because I want to get better at admitting wrong. And my sense is that's what sobriety is about. And you've said it several times, and I've sort of pushed back on this thing that it isn't that I have wrong thoughts all day long. That isn't a problem. It's when I think they're right that I have a problem. That's the conflict. When I start noticing they're wrong, I start giving some credit to this uneasiness I have. And I say, okay, probably not the best decision to be making right now. If I'm witnessing some doubt, I'm not going to make a decision. That's one of the practical things that has come from this. When I feel doubt, I just say to people, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm going to sleep on it. At least I'm going to sleep on it at least tonight. And sometimes in the process of sleeping, there's a clarity that comes in the morning. And so I rely on that in a more immediate thing, rather than wait for things to get so horrible and circumstances to get so crazy that I finally say, well, maybe there's a problem here I should look at. The development of denial has given me the opinion that if I can deny the worst results, I'm not facing the consequences, while I'm facing them in these tiny little incremental bits, and they're bound to get worse. So if what I'm doing now is thinking that I need to escape and get away from them, I'm going to feel better if I get over there, rather than admit what I'm doing, even in the thinking I'm doing now about getting away, is wrong. I don't have to know any more than that to say, I'm honest. I'm wrong. I must be wrong about what I'm thinking to be feeling what I'm feeling, and start to use the effects as a guidance system, rather than think of them as something to overcome and treat. If I'm treating the effect, I'm trying to feel better about something. Why would I feel better if I wasn't doing something wrong? So it's really getting to the root, which is exactly what the book talks about over and over and over again. Why, having been given perfect release from alcoholism, shouldn't we be able to achieve the same freedom Bill's talking about from our defects and difficulties by the same means? Different words, but that's the basic point. In the 12 and 12. Whenever I am disturbed.
That's a good place to wrap up.
Good. So thank you for your hour. And we will continue. And anyone out there, if you've got any, there's an email there. If you've got any questions or any points you'd like to introduce, or if you'd like to be included in the conversation, you're certainly welcome to. And I love this. I appreciate you very much for participating, Tara, and everyone else for
I'm
listening.
grateful.
And everyone else, you have the absolute freedom to do whatever you want with this. And it's not what I tell you, but it's what you do with it that will impact you and me and everyone else. So my best always.